And then for her to kiss him after that statement.
I wish that the movie didn't try to bill itself as being, let's show real depictions of love and all the forms that it can take, because that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing fantasy, we're seeing lust, we're seeing also like some situations that are directly toxic.
Hi, we're Julie and Kelly, and we're here to find love. If you're new here, we're two relationship coaches going deep on frothy shit. We usually examine the psychology and dating themes of reality TV, but today we're doing it for Love Actually.
As a refresher, if you haven't watched Love Actually is a 2003 romantic comedy following about 9 different storylines that all purport to show a different form of love. So it features a whole bunch of very big name actors: Keira Knightley, Hugh Grant, Martin Freeman, so many of them. And since the movie takes place during Christmas time, it has become kind of a beloved Christmas classic. And it's often kind of treated as a sort of sappy, heartwarming Christmas rom-com. All that said, the movie, it's not without critics. When the movie first came out, media critics were actually pretty lukewarm about this movie, and if you go on the internet today, you'll find basically endless think pieces debating the movie. I think some people absolutely adore it, and some people vehemently hate it. And I feel like you and I sort of fall somewhere in between, right? For me anyways, it's a love-hate relationship for this movie.
Whenever I watch Love Actually, it harkens back to Christmas. I like the music, I like the vibes, but to really dig into the themes is a different question. To really think about the way that the movie presents itself, the lessons it's trying to portray, that's when I have a bone to pick with it.
This is a movie that, if you don't think too hard about it, it's great. It's fun. I enjoy it. I love the movie. I always enjoy watching it. But once you actually stop and think, what is this movie trying to say about love? What is this movie trying to say about relationships? That's when things get way more dicey. The big debate when it comes to Love Actually is this movie actually romantic? And I took the liberty of checking out the internet and what people have to say about this movie in, actual cultural critique type publications. In The Atlantic, we have Christopher Orr writing, "Love Actually is the least romantic film of all time." He says, "Love Actually is exceptional in that it is not merely, like so many other entrees in the genre, unromantic, but rather it is emphatically, almost shockingly, anti-romantic," which is pretty big words. I'm sort of inclined to agree with him too, but we'll get into that. So Orr gets into how this movie is just all kinds of disturbing when it comes to lessons about love, and he basically tears it apart. I think this was about 10 years after the movie came out. Since then, Mother Jones wrote a whole rebuttal of that article. Dreyfuss writes, "Love Actually is, in fact, less a film about love as it is a film about people who think they are in love. Almost all of the stories center around people who either early on or before the film even begins figure out they're nuts about someone and then spend the 5 weeks before Christmas wondering, what do I do now?" He writes, "Romance does not equal everlasting true love. Is the movie a meaningful blueprint on how to meet your life's love and make it last with them forever? Of course not. But is it romantic? Yes. Romance is the big gesture. Romance is the love that erupts without a spoken word. Romance is skirting airport security." So that's Ben Dreyfuss basically arguing with Orr, saying that actually it is romantic, and we can debate what the word romantic means, but it is a romantic movie. So we do see people taking pretty strong opinions when it comes to this movie, and I think that is really interesting. But that core question at the heart of it is, what are we supposed to take away from this movie? What are the lessons about love that we're supposed to be learning, and is this even a healthy representation of love? I think the reason that people are hooked on that question is because the movie itself opens up with this kind of mantra of love actually is all around us. If you really look for it, you'll find love in all of these strange situations. They talk about the airport terminals, the arrivals gate, seeing all these different people hugging it out, and you can see love in these situations. And that's how the movie starts, and then it says we're about to watch a movie that's all about seeing love in all of these different forms. And that setup really primes the audience to think, hey, we're about to get into a movie that's going to show me some heartwarming depictions of what love can look like. And in some ways we do get that. In some ways we get, some stories about the way a father and son, or a grieving husband and his stepson learn to form a close connection after the death of, their mom/wife. Sure, that's a very sweet story. We get the story of a kind of old washed up musician and his manager, and how they've actually formed a really strong, loving, maybe slightly queer relationship over the course of all of their years working together. It's not really clear if it's meant to be romantic or not. I found it romantic, but we do see all of these different forms of love being shown. But then at the same time, we have, as Orr puts it, extremely anti-romantic storylines also being given to us. We have the storyline that involves Alan Rickman cheating on his wife with his secretary, finding out because she saw a necklace that he had purchased as a present, and she thought that it was for her. It actually ended up being for the mistress, and she got a Joni Mitchell CD instead. And there's this really depressing scene of her crying it out over the Joni Mitchell album by herself in her room. And we know that this is not supposed to be romantic. We know it's supposed to be painful, but it's interesting that the storyline is included in a movie that purports to be showing what true love looks like. And the question is, why? Why are these storylines here? We have the cue cards, the guy who is madly in love with his best friend's newlywed wife and decides to tell her on Christmas behind his back. We have Laura Linney, who is there playing a love-struck office worker who is in love with a guy in her office but has to basically, give up all of her life and interests and, kind of personal endeavors to take care of her brother who is hospitalized and unwell. And we're supposed to feel like, oh, wow, that's sisterly love. But meanwhile, we see that she's clearly traumatized by the situation and has basically no personal boundaries between her and her brother. So it's confusing. I don't know what we're supposed to think about these storylines. Are we supposed to find them romantic? I think that's really the key question here.
As you're talking about all of these plot lines, I would center them and kind of label them as A plot lines. Like, these are the plot lines that have taken over the forefront of the movie. But I would argue that a lot of the plot lines that are living underneath them are the more romantic parts, just like the Sam and Joanna storyline. It's not about this kid falling in love with his classmate, which is very interesting that she has the same name as his mother. It's really about the love between the stepfather and the son, like you mentioned. But it's so much quieter, and that doesn't get as much of a storyline as these like bigger romantic gestures that we're seeing. I would say that the movie, it does show glimmers of love, but it's covered by all of this like big gestures, idealization, and like those plot lines are so shiny that you just don't see the undercurrents of what's happening underneath it.
Right. I think you're totally right. There's all sorts of other romantic plot lines. I mean, to me, my favorite plot line in this movie is the one that is the two kind of porn actors, or they're like body doubles, like actors who are doing this sex scene, and they have a very straightforward storyline. They are just two people who met on set and they liked each other and they went on a date. That's it. That was the story. And I was like, you know what? I'm kind of here for it. To me, that was like one of the more quote unquote romantic storylines, because it had nothing to do with, it was just very real life. Like, this is how romance typically happens in real life. We meet someone, we ask them out, we have a first date and a kiss, maybe it goes well, and then we start dating. It's pretty straightforward. And I actually kind of appreciated that, as compared to some of, like you said, the shinier storylines that are a lot more blown out of proportion. The guy who doesn't speak the same language as the woman he's falling in love with, and then he learns the language and they both flies to Portugal to propose to her. Like, those more dramatic storylines have a lot more of the kind of focus in the movie, and they are kind of the crescendos of the movie, those dramatic gestures. And they're the ones that are a lot more like, it helps create the feeling of like we're in a rom-com right now, but they're a lot more questionable as far as, what are we actually seeing here? Are we actually seeing love actually?
It's lust, it's limerence, it's a hollow representation of love, and it's close to it, but not quite.
In particular, there are so many actually directly toxic dynamics and toxic love lessons in this story that I think just don't really have a place in this movie. I'll toss it to you, Julie, to kind of take us through them.
There are 3 really big consistent through lines that a lot of the stories center on that we can pull on. And the first one is the workplace romance between the boss and the employee. Like, I just don't think it's romantic to fall in love with your supervisor. They're in a position of power. So to see it playing out and to see them being painted in these classic tropes, like with the secretary and Alan Rickman's character, she's like this seductress temptress that is snaring him into her trap. And all she wants is like, a piece of him and for their affair to be realized. I just thought that was really cheesy and really problematic to show that positioning, because I think that whenever someone's in a position of power, they always have more power than their subordinate naturally.
Yeah, this topic of workplace romances is so complex because, stepping back outside of the movie, of course, a lot of people have experienced this, right? We're human. We spend a lot of time around our coworkers day in and day out. We get close to them. It's inevitable that sometimes feelings will crop up. But to your point, Julie, there's such a huge difference between, 2 coworkers at the same level, or maybe like 2 people in separate departments, hooking up or, forming a relationship versus when it's a boss and a subordinate. Because like you're saying, there's this inherent power dynamic between them, an employer and the person they employ. That employer or boss has power over them. They can fire them, they can impact their financial situation, their reputation in the company, or even in the industry, depending on like how, influential this boss is, right? They affect, their ability to get raises and promotions, their ability to potentially get jobs elsewhere. That person, there's economic power that a employer has over their employee. And there is so much economic leverage, I guess, that the boss could have over their subordinate. And that complicates the relationship because it makes it harder for the person who is lower level to be able to fully feel free to speak their mind or to say no if they want to say no, right? Or even later to break up, right? It just makes it harder for the person in the lower level who has less power to be able to really have full agency in the relationship. The funny thing about this movie is that it's like all of the romances are workplace romances, right? There's so many storylines, like you said, the writer and the maid, the prime minister, Hugh Grant, and his aide. It's such a dramatic power differential between them. And we even see that aide, clearly she deals with sexual harassment from other politicians. The president of the United States comes onto her aggressively in a way that clearly she is uncomfortable with and not okay with. We see this scene even happen. We see what a vulnerable position she is in, and yet, but it's okay when Hugh Grant does it because he's cute. It's like, is it okay? I don't know. It's very, very hard to say. It's like 6 or 7 different storylines all have to do with workplace romance, and this movie never says anything about it. It really doesn't go into what a vulnerable place these lower level people are and how this could very easily turn into a toxic dynamic for them if the boss figure that they may catch feelings for has any bad bones in their body, or if things go awry in their relationship, it could easily impact the lower level person's career. And you don't know that when you first start dating someone. You don't know that when you first develop a crush on someone, that they could maybe later have a vengeful personality, right? And you'll only realize that later, and that's what makes it so complicated to enter into this type of relationship. And I just wish that this movie would have at least touched on the fact that this is something that isn't necessarily just, woohoo, fall in love with your boss. Like, it's not that simple in real life. In real life, this can have really, really dire consequences.
What it does add to the conversation, to your point, it really inflates these toxic ideas of what it's like to fall for your boss, because Hugh Grant in the movie, you do see the leverage that he has. He kind of publicly embarrasses the president of the United States, and it sours tension between like Britain and the US because of the one incident of him seeing the president come onto the aid. That's the power that he is just so casually displaying. That's the power that he can inflict onto his aide if they ever did break up. And she's in the political space. If she really wanted to advance, if she wanted to work for a different office, of course it's going to flow through the prime minister. So a lot of that could be, you know, her attraction towards him being a man of power. I just think that the movie didn't do a great example of showing how that could go off the rails very, very quickly.
I just realized he did fire her too. Didn't he? Like,
he did.
Or at least he redistributed her. You know, he like
just
basically let her go.
Of his emotion. Like Amy,
oh my
like,
gosh.
He just felt, okay, this might be a little bit inappropriate. I can literally disrupt her life, disrupt her responsibilities, move her anywhere I want at the flick of a finger or like a pen. That is really problematic. And I'm imagining if I was in that situation, it would be really confusing on how you navigate that. If you have some attraction to your boss, but, you know, this person also controls your healthcare, your pay, your advancement, your holiday. They control so many things that it's so hard to separate the man from the relationship and like what he represents. So to me, I just felt like unless they were planning on getting married, which is another issue of itself, no matter what, she is always going to like be following him in the relationship. He's always going to set the tone. Is that a consensual relationship? Is that a good relationship? Is that a safe relationship? No, it's not. For someone to have so much power inside and outside of the relationship, I just think that it's not a good story. Like, even their first kiss was in public. I did not find that romantic. I found that to be very like skeezy.
Yeah, I forgot about that part. And the movie, I mean, at the very least, if that happened in real life, if the prime minister was caught at a school function making out with someone behind the scenes, that would be a national story. That would be blown up. That could also be career altering for him too. So it's funny that the movie didn't interrogate any of that at all.
The second way that we have is the idea of the grand romantic gestures. We see this of Keira Knightley's storyline where she, and this is a growth storyline for me to watch, like her husband's best friend. I know you don't like me. I know you have a problem with me, like many times throughout the story, because it's clear that he negatively treats her in some way. He like nags her, he ignores her, he dismisses her. And then for it to turn out, actually, the reason I've treated you like that is because I love you. I was mean to you on purpose. And here's this grand romantic gesture to make up for all of the times that I was a jerk to you or dismissive. I thought that it kind of reminds me of like elementary school flirting, where the boy that pushes you at recess is the boy that likes you. Reality TV, we talk about this a lot, where you can just do one really big romantic gesture and it makes up for all of these like fundamental relationship incompatibilities that you have. I hate the cue card scene. I think that's a scene that still gets referenced and quoted a lot as like this premium of what love can and should like. To me, it just felt like, wow, he can't even apologize for his behavior. He can't even apologize for his lack of vulnerability, the situation that he's put the three of them in, and how complicated it is now for him to basically tell his best friend's wife, I have always loved you and I'm always going to love you. And then for her to kiss him after that statement, she's literally had no interaction with him outside of the toxicness and then a grand romantic gesture. That's all she's known him as, like these two extremes. And then she awards his bad behavior. Yeah. That to me, I mean, it is a blueprint of love, and I do think a lot of people follow that, but that's toxic, unhealthy attachment being played out on the screen as we watch.
Absolutely. That scene and that whole storyline to me is like one of the most egregiously anti-romantic storylines of this film, because I think it's supposed to, the movie is kind of positioning the lovelorn best friend as, oh, poor him, he's in love, but he can't ever be with the woman he loves. Oh my gosh, it's so romantic that he's going to keep loving her even though he can never be with her. But that's not romantic, because the truth is, harboring a crush on a friend's partner, how did it get from the point of a small crush to being in love? How did it get to that point? It gets to that point because you are being indulgent, because you are sitting there and wallowing in your feelings. Like I said, we are human. It's, of course, sometimes you will get a crush on your friend's partner, because it happens if you are just spending time and your partner is dating someone hot or whatever. It happens. Yeah, if my partner's dating Keira Knightley, or my friend is dating Keira Knightley, yeah, I might have a problem where I have a crush on Keira Knightley. Of course it's going to happen, but like, you just be an adult about it, and you don't just sit there and harbor your feelings and like stoke them and secretly be like, oh, woe is me, I'll never be with this woman. No, you just say like, oh, I had a little crush on her, but you just get to know her and you move on, right? We are adults. We are not 16 where it's like, oh, what am I going to do with this crush? It's like, you can have crushes on people. You can have a little spark of a feeling for someone and not do anything about it. And it doesn't have to be something so dramatic. And the fact that he let it get to the point of, oh, I think she's really cute, to I'm in love with you and will love you forever, that's on him. That's not just like, oh, love happens, oh, you can't control your feelings. It's like, no, you can. You can stop yourself. You can curtail. You can create distance between yourself and someone, so that way you're able to get past the feeling of, I need to like this person romantically, to the feeling of, I just like this person. I like being around them. I like hanging out with my best friend and his girl. It's fun. You are able to do that consciously, and you make the choice whether or not you want to turn it in, you want to main characterify yourself and turn yourself into the unrequited love guy, or if you're just going to be a G and just move on. And you got to let yourself move on. He is not letting, you see, I mean, the fact that he sat at that wedding filming her face close up, he's not trying to move on. He is harboring those feelings. And so it is on him. This is not romantic. This is him disrespecting his best friend, disrespecting Keira, and making it seem like, oh, but I'm the victim of my feelings. What can I do?
He could have allowed the bubble to burst if he just wasn't, because it's obvious he fell for her because she's beautiful, but there's a lot of really beautiful people out there. Get to know them outside of seeing them as this one-dimensional caricature that you can project your stuff onto. He didn't allow himself to get to know her, and if he did, I argue that he would have realized that she wasn't his person, and there's a reason why she was in love with the best friend. He just did not give himself the ability, or maybe he didn't trust himself, which is another thing about who he is. The best friend maybe needs to evaluate the people that he's bringing his partner around, because for him not to be able to really be nice to her, be able to extend her any kindness because he liked her, that's really problematic. And I just think it's gross that he knew so little about her outside of her being his best friend's fiance wife. Until, the very end, when she sees this extremely creepy wedding video of her the entire time, all of these close-up, and like none of the family, none of the friends, none of the wedding. I would be pissed if that was my wedding video. Are you kidding me? Not cute, even how he did the cue card thing, because that was a level of deception that he then pulled her into. So now she's this like active contributor to keeping this facade going around the best friend's back. It starts off the marriage on the wrong foot, because now she's keeping secrets from her husband, and low-key cheated on him when she crossed the line and physically kissed him and instigated that. Because it's like, what do you do in that situation? I think that she was really confused and she didn't know what to do, and maybe she did mistake it as this big romantic gesture, but I hate the fact that we didn't see anything about her relationship with her husband, how much they clearly love each other, how much they clearly get along, how much they support each other. And what we saw instead was her indulging in this toxic dude's limited fantasy and perception of her.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's just like a fantasy that he chose to stoke. He turned the dynamic into the story of him not being able to get the girl of his dreams. And that is, you're making yourself into a victim of your feelings instead of recognizing that you can control the way you respond to situations, and you can control the way, you can't control your feelings, sure, but you can control the way you respond to a situation, and you can logically think through, using your actual brain, think through and understand, oh, hey, you know, I clearly am attracted to this woman, and also she's dating someone else, and so I'm gonna just put that aside and not sit there and like be in my feelings constantly, which is clearly, he said at that wedding, being in his feelings, and we know that he's probably done this before too. For it to get to the point that he says he's gonna love her forever, he has spent a lot of time sitting in his feelings for her instead of being able to just set it aside. And that's what, you know, emotional maturity is about. It's not sitting there and being swept away by your feelings. It's acknowledging them, being aware of them, and responding to them in a way that is healthy, that is best for yourself and the people involved, that is going to limit conflict, not maximize it, right? And so this is, it's like, it goes back to what we're saying. It's like, this is not only anti-romantic, but it kind of is, instead of showing like, wow, love is beautiful and can be found everywhere, it almost to me shows like, wow, this is an example of how someone can almost like bastardize love or take love and turn it into something that is used to hurt people, right? This is an example of love being used for harm, self-harm, and harming others, harming other people's relationships, right? And so, yeah, I'm honestly surprised that this storyline was part of this movie that purports to be about showing true love, when it's so clearly something very, very, we can debate about whether he's in love with her. Maybe we'll just say that he is, sure, whatever. But like, to include it in a movie that is supposed to be about heartwarming tales of love, it's like, no, we're missing the point here if that's what this is supposed to be.
Totally. And that leads us to our third toxic takeaway, which is unrequited love ever a good thing? Because I would argue that that is why people, in that they still cite the scene as such an everlasting example of what love could look like. Unrequited love is, I think, one of the deepest expressions of longing. It's not love, but it's love adjacent. It's this intoxication of wanting someone, not quite having them, and then your imagination going wild with all of these fantasies, possibilities, ways that it could be. How could we be together? You see their face, you see how they touch themselves, like when they move their hair behind their ear, and then you create all of these like scenarios to spin off of that.
To be fair, when I think of Keira Knightley doing all those things, I also feel my heart beating. So I get it. But
the better expression of love that I would have liked to see is him sitting down with his best friend and saying, I have been having, you know, I've had a crush on your girlfriend or your wife, and it's starting to get out of control. I tried to curb myself by creating distance, by not being super nice to her. But now I just think that it's tipping the scale a little bit, and I need to bring you into the conversation because at the end of the day, it's about you and me. It's about our connection. It's about our friendship. It's about how I want to show up for you. What he did instead...
That would have been so beautiful. You're right. That would have been love, actually. Holy moly.
That would have been love.
Right.
He chose lust, actually, and he chose... going to Michael's, getting the cue cards, writing it down, getting a boom box of like, you know.
You're right. He chose all of these little decisions that he made that shows he doesn't care about that friend. Come on. Like, he doesn't care about that friend. Wow, you're right. How honestly beautiful would it have been for him to sit down, because also that shows his willingness to release her, to release his feelings for her, to sit down with his friend and say, hey, I have feelings for your girl. I have feelings for her, and I don't want to have feelings for her because I want to support you. I want you two to be happy. I don't want to feel this way. I got to figure out how to stop feeling this way. That's what he's not doing. He's not sitting there trying to figure out how to stop feeling that way. He's sitting there just letting the feelings like keep going. And you're right, it's about bursting the bubble. He wasn't willing to burst the bubble. He wasn't willing to let her go. And true love would have been actually letting her go instead of sitting there and continuing to pull her and his friend into his story of unrequited love. He's honestly like, it's, if his friend decided to cut him out of their lives, I think that would actually make a lot of sense. And it's because of his actions. It's not because of his feelings. It's because of his actions. His feelings you can't help, of course, you know, whatever. If you have a crush on someone, whatever. But it's the fact that he let it get to this point and did all of these things. That's
a great distinction. You can have feelings for people, but feelings are feelings. It depends on how you act and how you behave and the integrity that you hold yourself to. Yeah. He lost all of that as soon as he decided to tell her his feelings, and instead of making it seem like a show of respect or a demonstration of care towards his best friend, he eliminated him entirely and made it about, I need to tell you, you know, how I feel about you, and that matters more to me than anything else that's happening. Your marriage and my relationship with my best friend.
It's selfish.
Exactly. He put them all in an extremely tricky situation, and I just hate that, you know, he made her a cheater.
It's selfish at the end of the day, what he did. That's not love. That is self-serving. You just wanted the high of how good it'll feel to tell her, how good it'll feel. It'll be so cathartic to finally tell her and see how she feels. Like, that is all. It to me feels adjacent to almost like an addiction, right? You just want the rush, that rush of feeling the high of like doing something risky. It's like, you know, it's like riding a roller coaster, you know, or whatever, going and, you know, cliff diving or whatever. It's like a little bit dangerous and you want the rush, and like that's why you're doing it. And so he put these people's relationships, he put his friends' well-being at risk because he wanted to feel that high. It's the most unromantic thing to me. In fact, I think it's selfish is what it is.
It's unromantic, but the movie showcases that so many times, and I guess this is why they open the movie with the airport scene of, you know, someone running through security, rushing to the person that is the love of their life and being like, I can't live without you, and having this really big romantic gesture. That, to me, does not feel romantic because it feels like there has been such a repression of vulnerability before that point. It is so bottled up that when it's when you do need to say it, it comes out in this huge gesture that just isn't sustainable for real life. You can't just keep your feelings bottled up until you can't contain it, you know, release it in a moment and then go back to how you were doing things before. In a relationship, it's a lot more romantic to be vulnerable through your daily actions, through your conversations, through how you share your feelings. I go back to the sister, the brother, and the coworker storyline. She was able to tell her coworker, I want to have all of these things with you. I want to get married. I want to have children. I fantasize about you. I think about you. I want a future with you. But then she wasn't able to say, by the way, I caretake for my brother, and this is the reality of my life. I'm on call for him. I see him all the time. I see him for holidays. I haven't had a relationship because of him. That, to me, is a greater demonstration of vulnerability and telling him, this is how I want to get to know you. This is the relationship I want to co-create with you. Instead, it came out really bizarre. It came out really, I think, sad, and I felt like she wasn't able to get what she wanted because she just didn't let him see who she was. And that, to me, is not love. Like, love to me is not this huge romantic gesture, and then you just disregard and ignore all of the other things that make a relationship what it is, which is active communication, the sharing of life, the sharing of values, and giving someone the ability to deeply know you and giving them access to that. And letting them reject you if that's what they have to do, but you at least you get to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that storyline in particular, that was another example of a storyline that I think that just like the Sam, Joanna, like the two children and the stepdad, that was actually, the love story was actually between the father and the son. Like that was, it was supposed to be about their love story. I think with the Laura Linney co-worker brother, I think they were trying to say that the love story is between Laura Linney and her brother, like the way that she loves him is so wow, she'll put him before anything, and that's what true love is. That's true, like that's what love looks like. But it's not actually. Caring for someone to the point that it destroys you, that you are ignoring your own needs, that your life has been turned upside down to take care of another person. It's obligation. Maybe she doesn't have a choice, but it's clearly hurting her. She's not happy, and her life is getting, in many ways, destroyed over what is going on with her brother. And that's not to say that she shouldn't take care of him. Of course, she, you know, it is beautiful, and it is a show of strength for her to be able to do that. But to say that this is, wow, it's so beautiful, this is real love, I think is, I just wish the movie had not positioned that as something that is healthy, because I actually don't think it is. I think there is a lack of boundaries. She's not able to look out for herself and advocate for her own needs, because the truth is, yes, her brother is unwell and he needs a lot of care, but she needs care too, right? And she needs to find ways to take care of herself as well. And that truth was completely lost on her. And in the movie was like, yeah, she should take care of her brother and just drop everything and take care of him all the time. And it's like, anyone who has a relative who they take care of, or you know, just needs support, there is a lot of love there, because you want to take care of this person who is so close to you. And also, there's a complexity, because there's a complexity to the fact that my life is impacted as well. And I also have to find the balance between taking care of the person in my life who needs me and taking care of myself. And both things need to be prioritized at the same time. So for this story to only show Laura Linney taking care of her brother and not actually showing her, we see no examples of her taking care of herself, I think that it's really hard to call this healthy love. In fact, primarily to me, this is sad. This is primarily a tragedy. This is someone abandoning themselves to care for another person in a way that ultimately will not be sustainable and isn't healthy.
Well said. Completely agree. And it's sad because the opportunity that she has to open up her life and to really invite someone to share not even the burden, but just to create a life together where she doesn't have to be alone, she does everything within her power to not make it that way, to not let someone in, to not ask someone for help, to not share someone about the reality of her life and create, you know, a new pathway together. She just shuts that all down to go back to what she knew, which is a life of limitation, repression, and obligation with the caretaking with her brother. And that to me just does not feel romantic. It will breed resentment, and it will breed contempt and anger for the situation that she's in, because feelings are healthy to express. You can't bottle it up. You can't let it out in an opportune moment and then dismiss all of the times that you weren't able to communicate with your partner the way that you needed to. That's not what a healthy relationship is predicated on. It's really by active, ongoing conversation. It's through consent. It's through, you know, dreaming about something together. And the movie just felt so one-sided in so many ways. Like even with the writer-made storyline, when he, you know, flies across and like goes to her home to like profess his feelings for her, that to me felt so unromantic, because yeah, he brought all of the townspeople with him, but they never really had conversations about like what the relationship meant to each other. And here's this guy that flew, you know, across the world to be with me. What do you do? It's like the same sense of obligation of, well, they did this gesture. Yeah. This is how I need to reciprocate. And love is not transactional, but love actually makes it seem that way.
Yeah, you're so right. I will say that I liked that storyline. I think like a big asterisk over all of this is, you know, it's a rom-com, and I think that as long as we watch rom-coms understanding that it's dramatized and that there are some aspects of it that are unrealistic, if we have a movie like this where there is a clear suspension of disbelief, such as, you know, the idea that the two of them couldn't speak the same language, but they were like saying the same things to each other, it's like, okay, we obviously know that that's not really possible. Romantic. And so it's just like, it's dramatic, it's like dramatized for effect, for romantic effect. And so I there are some aspects like that I feel like I can look past because I recognize it's like fantasy to me. So I'm like, I'm just or it's almost like more rom-com fantasy than it is an actual, this is how real life looks like. But again, the problem is that the movie bills itself as being Love Actually. And I just wish that the movie didn't bill itself that way. I wish that the movie didn't try to bill itself as being, let's show real depictions of love in all the forms that it can take, because that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing fantasy, we're seeing lust, we're seeing also like some situations that are directly toxic, we're seeing some situations that are unhealthy for people, we're seeing situations that are, involve infidelity that never gets resolved. And it's like, this could be just an interesting depiction of how love can be messy. Like if the movie was called Messy Love or something, you know what I mean? Like, I think then I would be like much more like, wow, this is actually a pretty good movie. But the fact that it tries to say that this is about real love, true love, love actually, I think that's where the issues come in, because that's clearly not what these stories are about.
Yeah, that's an extremely well said point, Kelly. I fully agree. The movie and the way that it's framed. I mean, if it's a frothy movie that you're just watching at home, hot chocolate right before Christmas, you're cozy in your PJs, fine, throw it on. Just don't use it as a template for any kind of relationship that you may want to have meaningfully in the future, unless you want the relationship to be marked by one-sidedness, potential toxicity, and a lot of like unevenness, or a lot of like repression and not really showing your vulnerability. The movie had a really good opportunity to kind of, you're right, like lean into the messiness and lean into, this is a toxic storyline, but this is the way that it could be made healthy with the way that we are expressing love with the people in our lives. The movie kind of went into it, but then it took itself out like very fast. So it was fascinating to rewatch it, kind of like analyzing everything this time, because I just thought, oh my God, a lot of these couples, I don't see them lasting outside of whatever, relationship they're in. I see them, kind of getting out of that relationship like fairly fast, and it being kind of like a roller coaster.
Right, absolutely. This is absolutely not a story about the power of love or whatever that the movie says that it's about. It's a story about how love can be just as harmful as it can be beautiful, right? That's actually what this is about. And I almost feel like the movie knows that, right? I feel like the movie understands, like the necklace, the storyline with Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson. This movie knows that this isn't okay and that it's deeply painful. So the question is, why is that included in a story that's supposed to be about love? Like, why is that there? Why is the cue card story here? Why is the story of the brother and sister here? There's a point in the father-son storyline where, the kid has been like mopey and sad, and the dad says, what's wrong? Like, is it about your mom or it's something else? And the kid says, oh, I'm in love. And the dad goes, oh, I thought it was something worse. And the kid goes, worse than the total agony of being in love, which is, to be fair, extremely cute, an extremely cute thing for a 9-year-old kid to say. And probably in some ways very resonant for many people's experiences of love. The movie is aware that it is also about the pain of love and how it can cause harmful and toxic situations, but it just doesn't do a good enough job of creating this through line. I think this is much more a movie about the highs and lows of love. I wish that the movie didn't try to, paper over that or sugarcoat it. This is a nuanced and complex story about, what can happen when our feelings take control, right? It's a complex story about how love can be used to hurt people, how love can be, turn into something very, very unhealthy. And I think that is interesting. It's interesting to watch movies that aren't just about how sweet, this is all very romantic. It's interesting to watch movies about complex dynamics, but the movie, it kind of knows that that's what it's about, but it still keeps telling people that this is actually about Christmas romance, which, at the end of the day, it's not. It's kind of like, it's funny, the musician's storyline, his whole thing is that they take a song that he has written about about love, and they make it about Christmas, right? That's kind of what they did for his little Christmas song, and he's like all mad about it, and he keeps accidentally singing the words of the original song. To me, that's kind of like what happened with the movie. It's like, the movie was supposed to be about the mess of love, but then it got this like kind of cheesy framing put around it, probably just to make it more sellable and appeal to the masses. Like it put this like cheesy, like sugar coating on top of what should be, you know, actually just a movie about, you know, the complexity of love. So, I mean, I love the movie. I just wish it was kind of more aware of what it is, which is definitely not romantic.
It's not, and I wonder if like that tension of it not being decidedly romantic or decidedly toxic is why it has lasted so long. I mean, the 20-year anniversary was just, I think, this year, and there is so many think pieces about it. Our video is talking about it because it's like, it's so close to being one thing, and then it kind of chooses to be in the middle of, you know, it's like this movie, but it's also like trying to like talk about these love storylines. What I just think is like really the biggest takeaway from this is, you know, love is a lot more quieter. Love is not running through the airport. It is maybe having conversations. So you don't have to have the big airport moment. You don't have to have the big gesture. You don't have to fly across the country to profess your loves. You don't have to have these cue cards. You know, like if you're really loving someone with active communication, it's really quiet. Maybe it's like you in your bed at night just having these like really quiet, private, romantic, vulnerable conversations about someone. But that's not love. You can't show that in a movie. That's not exciting. And the movie kind of went for something a little bit more cinematic.
I think you're so right. And I think more the problem of this movie, it's like culturally, a lot of people's conversations about this movie, it's like, this is a heartwarming Christmas movie, and it feels like there's a lot of problems that have to do with people's perception of the movie, and a lot of problems with how people are interpreting it as romantic. And, you know, in some ways, this is also a product of its time. It's a classic 2000s rom-com, and it has a lot of the trappings of rom-coms, the drama, the grand gestures, the kind of love triangles, the infidelity, right? All of these dramatic storylines are kind of like par for the course when it comes to a rom-com. It's kind of, you kind of expect these kinds of dynamics here. And so in that way, it's like, I'm critical of it, but it's not like it is out of the ordinary for what a rom-com is, which is high drama and like kind of unhealthy representations of love. Like that's kind of what we all know that we're seeing in a rom-com. There's other things about this movie too that are so clearly a product of its time. The politics of it are a mess. I mean, the amount of fat phobia, the transphobia, the way these female characters are portrayed as these like little caricatures, you know, like you said, the secretary with like the devil's horns, like dressed up in red, looking like just like a stereotype of like lusty mistress. Like there are so many things politically in the movie that are like, oh my gosh, like that would never fly today. Like that would never fly to have a whole storyline based around the fact that, you know, the president has a crush on an aide that everyone keeps talking about how she's chubby and keeps talking about like how big her thighs are. Like it's like, good heavens, it's so gross. There were just so many little moments like that. Again, I just have to name it. I'm not going to go all the way into it because, again, it's like this was 2 decades ago. Today, this would never fly on TV. This would never fly in a movie. And, you know, product of its time.
Product of its time. And it's good for what it is if we just don't think so deeply about it. But that's what Here to Find Love is all about. We're just digging, and we're just there. It's hard because this movie is close. Like there are some parts where it's like, oh my gosh, this could be a really good representation of a healthy relationship, and then they veer off course to give it that movie ending. And as soon as you kind of like bring in that drama, I think you kind of lose the plot on what it's really like to showcase love actually, because you're moving towards lust, you're moving towards big, you're moving towards romantic, and that's not all love, you know. It's like just a very small variation of it.
There's a really great Vox article by Melinda Facade also about Love Actually, and also a very heavy critique of Love Actually. She writes, ask yourself, if this movie took place in the middle of summer, would it be that romantic, or would the heat expose the sweaty, hurried flaws in this film? Does it only draw us in because of its cozy winter siren call? And I think she nails it with that. I think there's something that about the cozy factor of the movie, the cute British accents, all the little Christmas sweaters, which I, of course, wore today because I wanted to be on theme. All of the kind of snowy, Christmas-themed storylines, I think kind of pad what is, in fact, a very complicated and at times toxic, depiction of what love looks like. So with that, tell us down below what you all think about Love Actually. Do you all enjoy this movie? Have you watched it recently? And what have you thought about it today versus when you first watched it when it came out in 2003? Because I know that when I first watched it, I actually hated it also, but my thoughts have really evolved. I think that I do enjoy watching the movie now. I find it enjoyable for what it is. I think that I still like watching it around the holidays because, as this Vox article mentions, it's like it is just like it has a cozy factor. There's something that just is endearing about it, but when you really think about it, that's when things get dicey. And so I want to hear what you all think about this movie. I'm sure everyone has opinions about it, so let's keep the conversation going down below. Let us know also what other movies you want us to analyze. We are going to start doing more of these movie analysis videos where we talk about a popular or trending rom-com or movie that has to do with relationships and dating. So if you have thoughts, any movies that you want us to analyze, let us know down below and we will look into it.
If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit the button down below. We do this every single week. And we'll talk to you guys next week.